Hello, welcome back. Now, you might have heard me announce the breaking news that a prisoner who has accidentally fled from jail has been found 3 days later after yet another prison blunder. That was William Billy Smith, 35, detained by cops after being wrongfully released from HMP Wandsworth earlier this week. Now, like I was saying, if I was going to wish for any of the people wrongfully released to be apprehended and dragged back into custody, it would be the Algerian sex offender, because he poses a threat to society. I'm not condoning the grey collar crime of fraud. Billy was sentenced to 45 months for multiple fraud offences. But actually, Billy handed himself back in. I mean, good. I'm glad he's now going to face justice and he's decided that it's the right thing to do. Brownie points to you, Billy. But what was he going to do while he was on the loose? Go and fiddle with someone's accountancy books? I mean, frankly, I wouldn't lose much sleep over Billy Smith being out on the streets. But as for some of these other people being wrongfully released and being released early before their sentences have properly been served, that really does give me sleepless nights, and rightfully so, because police chiefs are now saying it's going to lead to at least a 6% rise in crime. Let's speak now to Mike Neville, former Met Police DCI. It must frustrate you so much as a policeman, or the work you have to do, right, in order to make sure you secure a conviction, make sure evidence is gathered properly, make sure statements are taken down accurately, that you have crossed every T and dotted every I, so a tricksy lawyer can't get someone off. And then when you finally manage to put all that work in, the right person's apprehended, sent to prison, guess what? This government's just going to go, oh, bye-bye, off you go, doesn't matter.
And it's always the working class communities who get impacted on this, because the people who decide that to release prisoners, who let them out early, never have to live with them. If they said to the judge or the policymakers or the ministers, this thieving scoundrel or this sex offender will live next door to you, they wouldn't be so keen on releasing them. But they bin them off to council estates. And one of the phrases hyper-prolific criminals, yeah, that's, for whatever bizarre reason, that's people with 45 or more convictions. Now, what you imagine is, though, 45. But listen, 1% of thefts are solved, for example. So what it means is they've really done 4,500 crimes. And if you look at some of these people, I looked at a guy called Nicholson up in Gateshead. He was reported in the Telegraph. He has 343 previous convictions. So he's probably done 100 times that amount of crimes. And he got a community service order. I mean, at what point? I mean, I can understand. You know, I do a lot of youth work and people deserve a chance in life. Maybe 1, 2, 3 chances. But when you get to your 343rd chance, it's time to lock people up. And what we've got, though, we've got a left-wing government who really don't like locking up criminals. They think the criminals are victims of society. So it's not in their DNA to lock them up first off. So they like letting them out. But the thing is, there are, I don't know, maybe 20, 30,000 people in this country. If you just locked them up, it would crush crime, because these people, if you get 100 thefts, it's not 100 thieves. I
don't understand. I was asking earlier why we don't have these promised new prisons that we've been told are going to be built, mega prisons, supermax prisons for decades. What are they trying to create the Ritz or something? We're going to have gold taps and tiles and a grand piano in the foyer. It's a prison. I could build one of those tomorrow.
Well, there's several empty army bases that you could put, employ some guys with dogs, put the barbed wire. I'm old enough to remember the film The Dirty Dozen, where they have to build their own prison. You know, they have to build their own camp. And
there's an idea.
Sort of get them in there, but build it up. But as I say, if we locked up these people who just thieve all the time, and what gets me, it's an impact on society, Alex, because I go back to this story. There's 2 ladies. I live up in Staffordshire. There's 2 ladies in a little post office, and they were telling me people go in there every day stealing off them, and they steal, and they say, if you say anything, I'm gonna stick you with a needle, or I know where you live, and all this sort of stuff. And they work for 8 or 10 hours, and the money they make in that 8 or 10 hours, people are walking out the shop with in 5 minutes with no consequence. No. This is where society, you start to think, well, do you know what, I'll do that, because society is stuck together with very thin glue, and it's going to fall apart.
This is harrowing, actually. The inquiry into the Southport massacre, Axel Rudakabana, and hearing the testimonies of his brother Dion, and most recently his father Alphonse, who I must admit I feel incredibly sorry for. Alphonse, because he's talking about trying to handle this horrific, devilish, possessed child of his who threatened to pour oil over him and set him on fire. Dion and his brother and the father Alphonse lived in fear of their own lives with this tormented, disgusting, vile human. He says here, when he poured oil over me, his eyes were watery red. And he reported him to the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services. He was known to prevent, he said, no further action needs to be taken. This isn't, as far as I can tell, when you hear the eloquence of Dion, who's a university student and seems to be a very upstanding member of society, and the torture that Alphonse Ruda-Cabana was put through, sometimes you just don't know why someone comes out wicked. Because that's the only word to describe Axel Ruda-Cabana. Evil, disturbed, but clearly he was horrific to his own family. They had no support, and it led to one of the most disgusting, devastating attacks.
So I'm a crime historian. It's one of the most brutal murders, the 3 girls ever in this country. But what's another thread that runs through this entire thing is the fear of racism. So you had his the headmistress of his school saying that he was sinister, and he was carrying a knife. And who'd you get? Some lanyard-wearing character. We can all imagine that individual saying that you weren't allowed to use the word sinister. You can't use sinister about you. You can just imagine how they would smile at you, as I said, and they'd use the word appropriate a lot. And also, the fact that the headmistress was accused of racial stereotyping because it was a young black man with a knife. This problem runs through our entire establishment. Yeah. They cannot face up to it. And the brutality of this murder sums up another problem with this country. And it is just an utter mess. We cannot grip things. We cannot face awful truth. I looked at the last, after the railway incident, the awful, brutal stabbings on the railway. I looked at the last 10 stabbings where somebody had stabbed 3 or more times. Yeah. There was only 2 white suspects, and they were in Cornwall and in Hampshire, where it's a sort of 90% white. But still, you get these Baroness Casey reports describing the police as racist because they do this and that. We cannot, the police officers who are bravely patrolling the streets right now cannot help who commits crime. They have to be able to deal with them. But this thread goes through all of society. Axel Ruda-Cabana, how he is dealt with, stop and search, all these things that are meant to keep us safe.
It's woke at the heart of it all.
They're not keeping us safe because they're feared to death.
I said this the other day, it's woke. It is the most poisonous and dangerous ideology. And, you know, I've mentioned quite a bit as well that when you look at the crimes being committed by people with psychosis, 10 times more likely to end up in prison if you have psychosis, 10 times more likely to have psychosis if you're smoking strong cannabis, 10 times more likely to be vulnerable to getting psychosis if you're a young black man. Exactly. And the people they're not policing for possession and dealing are young black men. And again, because why fear them? Now let's talk about this on the subject of Axel Ruda-Cabana. Who clearly needed to be taken into probably residential mental health care very early, put in some sort of padded cell and not allowed to be anywhere near anybody, not even his own family. This man is clearly very, very deranged. Being flagged up to prevent, he'd already taken a knife to school. His parents were saying that, you know, we can't cope with him, we fear for our own lives. Nothing being done. And we find out today that more children than ever are being flagged to the government's anti-radicalisation scheme. Official figures show under 16s now account for the largest share of prevent referrals. Now, in the year for March 2025, 8,778 referrals were made to prevent. And that's an astonishing number, which is a 27% rise on the previous era, the highest total since records began. Children between 11 and 15 made up to over a third, over 3,000 of these referrals. And if you count days in the year, that is at least 10 children every single day being referred. Home Office statistics show the biggest ideological category are those with no clear extremist link. So what is their ideology?
What you've got, Alex, is you've got, if you looked recently in the papers, there was a school teaching that voting reform was far right. And so you have these teachers reporting people who say, I don't agree with mass immigration. So what happens with Prevent, because of political correctness, it gets clogged up with rubbish. And Douglas Murray described it as the far right bogeyman. Where is this far right?
Where is it?
But half, if you look at Prevent, what they're trying to do is all the time, they've got to say, oh, it's not not just Islamic terrorists. There's this far right. We'll balance it out, and it's a lie. I've seen former senior police officers. Neil Basu has seemed okay when he came out with this nonsense, and what they're trying to do is justify it and trying to say, well, we're not just picking on them. We're dealing with this as well. But it doesn't really exist. Where is this far right?
It's really. I just watched. I don't know why. I watched the ITV series Trigger Point. The first series was pretty rubbish, and I thought, I'll watch the second one. Why not? It seems to be just a load of 5 seconds to defuse the bomb. Oh, look, you managed to defuse it. Well, that makes sense because there's a second episode and the protagonist isn't dead. But what really stuck in my craw about that is all these bombs are taking place. This sort of evil gang, and like, is it Islamist? No, of course it's not Islamist. It's people related to a far-right party. I mean, but the problem is when they are trying to suggest that there is far-right in the UK and it's an existential threat, it buys into the grievance narratives of the likes of Ahmed Yaqub, who then encourage a load of Muslims to take to the streets against the far right, which doesn't exist. It plays their game.
It does actually play their game. And we saw the trouble in Whitechapel with the masked men marching up and down, Islamic, shouting Allahu Akbar and all that. And what's tragic for me, my grandfather, all my family have been soldiers, including me. My grandfather, D-Day, liberated Belsen concentration camp. And we're now in a country where Jewish supporters can't go to a football match.
It's apartheid.
It is beyond
Let's call
belief.
it by its name.
It's beyond belief.
It is apartheid in our second city. When you have Muslims saying, Israelis, we know they mean Jews. All Israelis aren't allowed. I'm sorry, if you're going to use that logic, because there have been Pakistani rape gangs, every single Pakistani should be banned from Britain. It's disgusting. It's harrowing.
It's true, but the thing is with the police, though, when we're going back to what we were saying about these hyper-prolific criminals being released, the police are going to end up chasing their tail, but the police do themselves no favours, really, in the sense that they don't use proper technology. They bang on about facial recognition. They don't even manage the CCTV. Most of these people who commit lots of crime are thieves. Yeah. And the only way to catch them, they're on CCTV, in a shop. Once they've run off, that's all that's left. And the police have no technology to sort of say, right, get all these images together. Right, we don't just arrest this guy for one crime, we're going to arrest him for 10, 20. But the record I had was 43 times. So if you catch somebody for 43 thefts, they do go to jail. But the police are forever chasing their tail, doing one at a time, and they've lost a lot of the experienced officers who could really help them. And as I say, the worst thing for me is it's the people at the bottom who have to endure it. When you live in a council estate, when somebody gets locked up for antisocial behaviour, thieving, assaults, whatever,
terrorising the neighbourhood,
you get a break. You've got a break. Yeah. But the break gets less and less now, and they're back doing more and more, causing misery, while people are sat in Hampstead saying, "Oh well, how lovely these criminals who are victims of society have been released." It's a real problem.
Mike Neville, thank you so much for coming into the studio. Okay, we're going to take